I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about transitioning to net zero greenhouse gas transport system. A brief introduction to who the ZEMO partnership is. We are a partnership between government and industry, so we get an annual grant each year from the Department for Transport. We also have a paid membership, so anyone interested in decarbonising the road transport sector can come and join as a member. And effectively our mission is to improve the existing policy that DFT use today to accelerate the uptake of low and zero emission technologies as well as fuels. And you might recognize some of the logos. We draw on a full breadth of different stakeholders, whether it be the people who make the vehicles, the people who operate them, the infrastructure and fuel suppliers, but we also work with local authorities and academia as well. I am the resident bus geek at the ZEMO partnership, so I head up the bus and coach group. We also have cars, fuels, commercial vehicles, and recently energy infrastructure. And what we do is we bring together the community in each of those sectors, understand where that sector is in terms of its transition to net zero, and then we work with industry and government to build an evidence base. So that might be testing vehicles, understanding the well-to-wheel emissions of, say, diesel buses, and then understanding where the technology is in terms of its performance and its ability to operate those same conditions as the existing market standard. But we also provide sort of guides, so aimed at operators and local authorities, new people to the industry who want to know what's required of installing hydrogen fuel refueling stations, or what do I need to do if I need to upgrade my depot to support electric buses. And all of that is aimed at accelerating the uptake. So how are we doing so far in terms of our net zero greenhouse gas emissions? Pretty well in the UK. We've reduced our emissions from 1990 by about 50% over the last 20 or so years. A large proportion of that has come from the reduction in the energy sector, so a transition away from coal to gas, and the uptake, particularly offshore and onshore wind. How are we doing in transport? Well, the majority of emissions at the moment come from cars and taxis, around 60% in total. Heavy goods and light vans take up about 20% each, and then a very small section, I'm pleased to say, is buses. However, since 1990, we haven't reduced overall emissions from transports at all. We've gone nowhere. So even with the introduction of hybridization, potentially the uptake in biofuels, the increase in traffic, the increase in freight and movements has offset all of those gains in efficiency. And that's why the transition to zero-emission technologies running on low carbon and hopefully net zero fuels is going to be so important to reaching net zero ambitions. So we're clear of where we need to go. The government has set the ambition for net zero. How are we going to get there? Well, in the light-duty sector, we've obviously got the end of sales of ICE engines by 2030 and obviously plug-in vehicles by 2035. So that's setting an indication to the manufacturers, supporting companies and private individuals purchase those vehicles. We've obviously got the infrastructure grants for home place and workplace charging. We've obviously got the plug-in car, van, taxi grants, the rollout of rapid charging, a key along the strategic road network. Crucially, benefit in kind has been reduced for EVs to very low, well, it was set at zero, I think it's 1% now. 50% of all new cars in the UK are purchased through companies or through fleets. So making the incentives work for those companies is going to be a huge driver to developing and sort of the uptake of particularly EVs and zero-emission vehicles as a whole. We're also recently you may have picked it up, the introduction of E10. So if anyone's got a petrol car, you may have seen E10, and that's about decarbonising the existing fleet by increasing the amount of biofuel or bioethanol, specifically 10%, in this case E10, into the existing fleet so that we can actually decarbonise the fleet that's on the road today. Oh, gone backwards there. In terms of the heavy-duty space, we've got a target for the end of sales of ICE in cars. We're also going to have it soon for buses, trucks, and the whole heavy-duty space. So look out for the consultations coming up in this autumn. I expect one for bus and maybe a call for evidence for coaches and potentially trucks as well. Obviously, lots of announcements going to be coming out around COP26. To support that, we've got the plug-in truck grant. We're having the zero-emission freight trials, so they're trialing various different technologies around hydrogen fuel cells, electric trucks, whether that's catenary or depot-based charging. The truck sector also has a voluntary 15% greenhouse gas reduction that they're looking to meet by 2025. I think they're still working on the details of that. And in the bus space, we've got quite a decent amount of funding at the moment, the most funding that's ever been given out to green technologies, £120 million here in England and 50 million up in Scotland. And we're working with the Welsh and the Northern Irish to sort of accelerate it there as well. Crucial to all of this is obviously the supply of renewable energy, whether that be through the targets for offshore wind and the supply of low-carbon hydrogen coming in. Crucially as well is what local governments can play in all of this, and we're already going to start to see this decade the introduction of zero-emission zones. So we've just had the introduction of the first clean air zone in Birmingham. Some of you might have picked that up, but Oxford and London are already talking about zero-emission zones from 2025, and that'll have a big role to play in behaviour change. So I keep pressing that. So how are we doing so far? This graph shows you the total number of car registrations in the UK from 2013 up to 2020. That's the big blue block. You can see in 2020 there was quite a big fall-off due to COVID, roughly 1.6 million cars registered last year. 7% of those, so over 110,000, were battery electric, and 4% of that were plug-in hybrids. So that's quite a decent jump from the 1 to 2% that we've been having over the last few years. And quite a bit of that is to do with the company car benefit in kind that I mentioned. So things are starting to progress in the car sector. In the bus sector, because obviously I'm a bus geek, I just wanted to flag up that actually as a proportion of the whole market, the bus sector is moving faster than any other sector. However, it's also being heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic and the messaging around avoiding public transport and obviously working from home as well. So in 2019, about 10% of the market was zero-emission vehicles, predominantly EVs, although there are some hydrogen fuel cells coming in now. In 2020, actually 60% of the market was zero-emission, which is a phenomenal amount, but you have to take into account that only 500 buses were registered, whereas we're usually seeing about 2,500 to 3,000. So the bus industry has taken quite a hit, but it also means that we've got, starting from a low base point, we can move forward. 4,000 zero-emission bus target for England by 2025. So that's 3 years to introduce 3,000 zero-emission buses. So we're going to have to see quite a jump in terms of the supply chain. Interestingly, we've got about 12, 13 different zero-emission bus manufacturers supplying to the UK at the moment. So there's quite a good amount of competition there. So hopefully we can reach that target. Just to mention some of the other work that ZEMO are doing, we're looking at the well-to-tank emissions to do with hydrogen pathways, so ensuring that the hydrogen supply in the UK is low carbon. That's very much a developing space at the moment. To support that, we've got the Renewable Fuels Assurance Scheme, and that is creating carbon emission factors specific to fuel suppliers. So a fuel supplier can come to us, get their specific feedstock and supply chain verified, so that operators can say, we are choosing the greenest supplier, whatever that might be, whether it's biofuels, or biomethane, or hydrogen, rather than just taking an average for the UK. Some other stuff we're working on is zero-emission bus certification and accreditation. So we've defined what a zero-emission bus truly is, and that's then used in the funding schemes. We've designed the testing for the plug-in truck grant eligibility as well. We've come up with an E10 checker. So if you want to know if your old vehicle actually is compatible with E10, you can go and check it on your E10 checker. We're also looking at retrofit. So there's quite a lot of interest in retrofitting zero-emission technologies to existing vehicles. Actually, we're speaking to Ricardo about hydrogen fuel cell, up at Teesside, retrofitting of a bus. There's lots of interest in transitioning the 6 to 10-year-old vehicles to zero emission there. And we're also looking at how to integrate life cycle analysis into policy with DFT going forward. Relevant probably for this audience is the EV Energy Task Force, which we're the secretariat for. That's a joint initiative between Ofgem, BEIS, OZEV, and industry. And the aim there is to say, what are the policy barriers at the moment into actually plugging in 30 million cars sometime in the future? What is the framework that needs to be introduced in the regulatory policy space to support that shift? Some of the key themes of those are interoperability, smart charging, data, who owns the data when it comes to plugging your car in and connecting it to your smart home, how do the systems communicate between each other, who is responsible for the data, etc. A big part of that is winning consumers' trust and making sure that they're confident in the systems, the charging infrastructure, the vehicles will get them there to where they need to be, and making sure that charging infrastructure is working consistently. So in terms of achieving net zero ambitions, very much the transition away from ICE engines, petrol and diesel, to battery electric. The main policy focuses for cars and vans and city buses will be electrification. And as mentioned before, the longer distance coaches, trucks, at the moment it looks like hydrogen fuel cell is going to be the solution for them. There has to be a lot of work done in terms of providing that infrastructure to support those vehicles. But crucially, as David Webb mentioned, a massive part of meeting net zero will be around modal shift. It's not just about the technologies or the fuels, it will be about behavior change. And local authorities have a good role to play in this, as well as national government, particularly in discouraging private car use in city centres. We say the right vehicle for the right journey. So can you take public transport, particularly in urban areas where there is infrastructure to support that? And things like clean air zones, zero emission zones will all be about encouraging behavior change and encouraging that modal shift. So just in summary, sure we're raring to get to lunch. The last decade, the 2010 to 2020, we saw sort of the introduction of the cleanest emission standards that we've ever seen, the Euro 6 standards. So that's pretty much getting ICE engines to as clean or near as clean as they're ever going to be. The decarbonisation of electricity, we've seen the impact of wind in particular, and the introduction of clean air zones. This decade is going to be about pushing that electrification, getting the adoption and the infrastructure out there to support the electrification in cities, providing that low carbon hydrogen and low carbon fuels for heavy duty sector, and the introduction of zero emission zones. And then from 2030 onwards, we'll be talking about modal shift, or modal shift will really start to become a key theme. And I think that's when we'll really be looking at what a net zero emission transport system really means. We might even be talking about a negative carbon economy at that point in time. But that's pretty much it from me. Thank you very much for listening.